right, Fun with Crypto podcast listeners. Hope everybody's doing well. On this episode of the podcast, I am going to be doing an interview with Mr. Ben Prentice, who has been featured on the Bitcoin echo chamber with Heavily Armed Clown. And we just talked about everything Bitcoin philosophy. I mean, we touched on the philosophy of monetary policy, the philosophy of even just understanding how ideas get projected in Bitcoin, how they get handled, and we even talk about social layers of Bitcoin that seem to occur as a result of Bitcoin. So it was a really amazing talk with Ben. I had a really fun time, and I look forward to having him on again. So without further ado, here is my talk with Mr. CoolbP. All right, Bitcoin accumulation country, thanks for joining us again on the Fun with Crypto podcast. I've got with me a very interesting person that I've gone back and forth with on Twitter. His name is Ben Prentice, and he's been on the Bitcoin echo chamber with Heavily Armed Clown a few times, and I've caught the episodes with him, and I found his explanations behind Bitcoin very interesting, and the explanations around his belief in monetary policy and the different aspects of Bitcoin security and whatnot. And him and I have gone back and forth a few times, and we hit it off. And he at one point I doxed myself with a tweet of one of my Lightning nodes. So he reached out to me and was like, "Hey, didn't realize that you were a local." So we got to chatting and said, "Hey, you know what? We definitely got to do a podcast." So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Ben. Ben, thank you so much for joining me on the Fun with Crypto podcast. I'm really excited to have you here, man.
Dude, I'm stoked to be here. What's going on, Koinikarus?
Not much at all. Just enjoying the wonderful New England weather,
Mm-hmm. Oh, so you're doxing me now? You don't have to bring me down into your doxing game, my friend.
Well, New England's a big place. There's quite a few states in New England.
Yeah, we should be okay then.
But yeah, so I mean, obviously, like I said, I've listened to you on Bitcoin Echo Chamber, and before we get into the whole rabbit hole story, I just want the listeners to know, what got you started before Bitcoin? Because there was definitely, before this point, there was you and you had your ideas, and how did this become what it is today?
Yeah, the more I learned about the world, and the more I learned about how we were constantly improving the technologies that make our lives better, and then I look at the world and how it functions, and how there is this I think a lot of concentration of power and concentration of wealth, and it seemed to be at the expense of the people doing all the work. And this is a common theme that you'll see in politics to this very day, that people talk about, that there are the greedy capitalist landowners that have enslaved us all through their greed and profits. And I used to think that profits were a huge problem, that essentially, that capitalism is the problem. And I turned an eye towards, people, someone like Bernie. I never became a Bernie Sanders type supporter or whatever, but I saw in that this socialist ideal, this idealism in the world, that, oh, well, there's plenty of wealth, and that we need to kind of redistribute it. And I actually do think that some of that wealth will be redistributed. But my point is that I think a lot of us agree that the system as it exists today is not fair. And there are certainly differing ideas about how to, flatten that fairness level. And I think technology, as it exists and as it evolves, is one of the things that helps flatten that, and there's this great, and this really continues to answer the question, because Andreas was the key for me to understanding Bitcoin. He was also the only first resource I had. and I'm not an Andreas maximalist or anything, but he has this great example about the ability to broadcast, and this ability to broadcast information, many hundreds of years ago was relegated to only the people that had that were literate and had scribes, and could write books. And a lot of that information was disseminated first, through the Bibles and the Torahs and the Korans, and eventually, Gutenberg with the printing press kind of, he leveled it out a little bit more. More people had access to broadcast information worldwide. And in the modern paradigm, it's easy to understand that, in the 1940s and 50s, or I guess 50s is better, people with, $100,000 worth of TV equipment and a satellite uplink and all this such could broadcast now worldwide. And their message, whatever their message was, whether it be right or wrong, was able to be broadcast worldwide, to everybody. And that was, again, this ability is now relegated to only these very massive TV companies and such. And, we're talking about concentration of wealth and power. So, there's a lot of, I'm not the only one saying that these media companies have a lot of influence. But today, this thing that I'm talking to you on now, and these things that we can't put down and we're constantly staring at and scrolling at, these little computers in our pockets now allow us to, as you and I are doing essentially right now, broadcast to the world at a zero additional cost. Once you have the sunk cost of the device, which is pretty much a foregone conclusion by modern, standards, that everybody just has one of these things. Now everybody can broadcast worldwide, and that paradigm is still kind of distilling into the world. It's still kind of, coalescing, that we're still trying to now figure out, well, now what, right? Because now it's, the fake news era of, CNN and Fox News. I always like to just bring those up as this kind of dichotomy between the two, the left versus the right or whatever. But really, I think the really interesting thing is happening on Twitter. And the reason I think that is, and this is hilarious too, because it's like my Twitter story is just like Bitcoin, and they're tied together because I got onto Twitter because of Bitcoin.
Same
but
here.
I avoided Twitter for about as long as I avoided Bitcoin. That I was just like, oh well, that's stupid. I have a lot more to say than 280 characters or whatever. Or didn't it used to be 180 or whatever? Anyway, the difference between Twitter and all the other mediums I've seen is that, like, for example, Reddit is by definition an echo chamber. You go to the Trump subreddit or the Bernie Sanders subreddit, just to keep the conversation in the same vein here, and like that's what you see. And you can go to the Trump subreddit if you're like a Bernie guy, but they'll actually kick you out of the Trump subreddit if you say you're not a Trump supporter. It's one of their rules, I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong. It's just that's one of the rules. So you have these like silos, right?
Yes.
These echo chambers. And Twitter is almost the opposite. Where, I mean, yes, we can block, and we can craft our own echo chambers, but by its nature, I actually got onto Twitter to only see. I'm going to tie this together. I'm going to answer the question.
Oh yeah, no.
I got onto Twitter to only see Bitcoin stuff, and by George, good Lord, I keep getting all these markets and politics and religion, and not just philosophy in the sense of Bitcoin, but like literally, like I'm seeing all these other spheres just creep in, and it's because of the way that Twitter aggregates information and the way that we as humans aggregate information. And the most interesting part of this is that on Twitter, I don't follow ideas, I follow people.
Yes.
And that is massively interesting. And I unfollow people too, by the way. When, as Colin put it on the Bitcoin Echo Chamber, they interfere with your intellectual exploration or something. I'm paraphrasing him here. But my point is that now, instead of, I think this new paradigm of information exchange will eventually solve the fake news problem all by itself. I've been pondering this for quite a while, and a fake news problem is a real problem today. That there's the CNN versus Fox News paradigm, but it's happening on the internet too. Because like they talk about like Facebook and Facebook the Cambridge Analytica and them, like, Russian bots, and like, I still think those are issues, but the way that I consume information now is really interesting. And I think what is different now is that I evaluate information from many different sources and evaluate them not based on where that information came from, but the content of it. So it's like the Martin Luther King quote. We don't judge the information by the color of its skin. We judge it by the content of its character. And that, once we start to do that as a society, we'll be much better off. And maybe we're not quite ready to do that yet. And there's, we can go into the education system and how it teaches us to kind of like accept information from authorities. And Andreas talks about that too, this appeal to authority. But
yes.
I do think that we're moving in the right direction. So to finally now answer the question, I think it took me a long time because I'm a skeptic. And I think you'll find a lot of Bitcoins are skeptics. And it took Andreas talking about helping, he talks about like banking the unbanked or whatever, but and that's kind of a meme now. But I more mean that he talked about this flat system, and about leveling the playing field, I think. And I think the problem with our current system is that it is not level. I think that's I don't know. I have a much longer answer to that, but that's the short answer.
That's awesome. No, that's totally awesome. But I want to go back to something you said about being a skeptic, because to your point, I came to Bitcoin in this way as well. In terms of it's like it took me so long because I was skeptical. And to your point, I find most Bitcoiners, especially like I guess you'd say hardened Bitcoiners, like are extreme skeptics. And I've quoted this before and I've tweeted this before, but it's like every single day I wake up and I try to destroy Bitcoin, and every day I fail, and the only thing I can do now is just go and accumulate more and use it. So it's like every day I wake up and I'm like, all right, there's got to be the angle. I'm gonna see it, and I can now break it down and get away from it. And then I'm like, no, I can't do that because it actually doesn't break in that way. And then I'm back to square one again, and I'm like, okay, it's the best again, and I go and accumulate more. So
I think I've heard you say that before, and I do the same thing. And we actually, I have some friends that I made through a group that Justin Moon started a while ago on that I think is now kind of starting to die off, but it was amazing for the 6 months. We were talking about Austrian economics in the context of Bitcoin, and it was like a book club. We were reading all these Austrian economics texts, and we were talking about the same idea, that it was like, wait, guys, are we crazy? And Zane, my buddy Zane Pocock, he goes, well, the fact that we ask this question every week, are we crazy, it means at least we're questioning it. And Marty Bent does that on every episode too. Yeah. He goes, man, like at the very end, he's always like, are we crazy, man, or maybe we're crazy? And that shows at least that we're not just like this crazy cult of people. Oh, Bitcoin will win. It's like at least we're like trying to kill it every day. I love that phrase that I wake up every day and try to kill it.
I fail, man.
It's tough. It's very tough to understand how Bitcoin can like take over global money, and that's why skeptics will certainly dismiss Bitcoin. And I did in 2012 or 2013 or whatever. But
same.
Somewhere around 2017, I was like, this thing is still going, and it keeps getting. Why is it getting bigger? And that's I think a lot of people have that same story. That's like, all right, let me at least take a look at this thing. And the rest is history, man. I mean, that was a year and a half ago now. Easy.
So actually, let's go into a bit of the rabbit hole story. You mentioned 2017. So let me ask you this: I came into Bitcoin prior to the Bcash fork.
Okay, you were just before me.
Like I was just there before, but again, it was because I was using BTC. And that's how I came to it originally, was through actual use. I didn't even really think of it as an investment vehicle, as a store of value. I was just like, this is internet money. It's super cool. Let me try to use this and see how this goes. And then one of my buddies, like, is the one that tuned me into that, hey, this is more than just, it's not just a medium of exchange. You can, it does other things. You can store value with it. And then of course, I went down the dark side and found an exchange. So, and
well, that's what I think is so interesting about Bitcoin is it's so many different things to so many different people. To Peter McCormick, and this might be similar to your story, I'm not sure. To Peter McCormick, love him or hate him, he got into Bitcoin to get a medication that he thought would help his mother that he couldn't get any other way.
That's right.
It enabled this trade. This plant that people buy and sell and grow, that grows naturally, a government said that he couldn't have. And he said, I don't really, there's this quote about like when a government institutes a law that somebody thinks is immoral, then the person has the horrible opportunity to decide between being unlawful or going against their own morals. And this was a case of Peter going against the law because he thought he was doing what was morally right to help his mother. And whether it just helped comfort her, I mean, obviously it didn't save her life. It's just such a sad story, but maybe it did help her in some way. And that was Bitcoin to Peter at first,
Yep.
And to some people in Venezuela, I have a few friends in Venezuela now. I did an interview with one guy, but I have another friend I just made. And what an amazing, unbelievable story it is to live in that country. But this guy is like, and listen, I know Bitcoin isn't saving Venezuela or whatever, but he's, both of these guys essentially say that this is the only way that they can survive. Buying US dollars on the street is really not an option for them. And if you're not familiar with I assume pretty much everyone, all of your listeners are familiar with the situation in Venezuela, but the money is just, it's evaporating, it's on a straight down path, and anything other than Venezuelan bolivars will store their value, including goods. So like when they get their money, they immediately go and spend all of their money. That, like, if you get paid, if you have a job of any kind and you get bolivars, which is what most people transact in because the government says you have to transact in bolivars. They don't say that cryptocurrency is illegal. In fact, they have their own shitcoin, but everybody's still using bolivars. And they all of the people then nobody saves bolivars. They immediately go and spend the money. So like they know exactly what they're going to purchase when they get their payday. And what some people do is they purchase some Bitcoins to just store their value, and then when they do need to go to transact, they go back into bolivars and then go immediately sell it. Sell their bolivars. Buy goods is what I mean. So that's that's.
You just got out.
Bitcoin is this store of value thing. To people in Africa and Asia, they're I think the Philippines, they're using it as a remittance tool. So they're using it as a long distance sending tool. To people in the first world, we are using it as a speculative savings account. So it's a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It's this very, very crazy, far-reaching technology that I think that even the rabid Bitcoiners among us are still trying to decipher the implications of this technology today.
It's to your point, it just marries so many different things together. I want to touch back on something you said about Peter, okay? And it's very important because I think what people don't realize is that all of these technologies, right? All these technologies that bring us closer together reduce friction, and Bitcoin helps reduce friction at I'd say like at the medium of exchange level. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like that's like to me, like sure. That's really key. I mean, if you take a look, like think of it like this, right? Like the pagers, cell phones, all of these things, like they were used at first. In terms of mainstream society, they were used by the fringes, which were people doing sketchy stuff. And then eventually it moved into mainstream. And the reason why those technologies get adopted first is because the law doesn't have a very good handle on them yet, and they offer to reduce friction. And then eventually what happens is they end up reducing friction for everybody. You know? When the technology gets adopted.
One of those,
you know?
right. Well, I think that's going to be one of those slowly and then suddenly things. I mean, today Bitcoin is not widely used as a medium of exchange, and I think it's a long way from that.
Oh yeah.
In order to understand what and you got Roger Ver pushing the narrative that the reason for that is that the fees are too high, and I think he would be, it would behoove him to do a little bit more reading on the origins of money by Nick Szabo. Szabo, I can never pronounce his name.
Okay, so
and to learn about like Saifedean's book also goes into the history of money and how money's come to be on a free market.
Well, you know what? Let's talk about the fees being too high. Let me ask you this, okay? As a fellow Bitcoiner, you were back there in 2017. You saw the fees, right? And let me ask you this: did the fees ever come into question when doing a Bitcoin transaction for you?
For me, no, but I wasn't transacting in 2017.
Well, I could tell you this. For me, I didn't care. Why didn't I care? Because I wanted to use Bitcoin. It's like that's so this BS about the fees, man. This is like it's like a dangerous narrative that like where people who don't understand enough about Bitcoin end up becoming shitcoiners.
Right.
Because now all of a sudden they're getting attracted to cheap money again.
And I think that is true, but I think it also, more importantly than that even, is that they're really looking at it the wrong way. That this is not PayPal.
Yeah, exactly.
This is a new monetary paradigm, and I keep seeing. I was sparring a little bit with some of these market guys. Raul. I heard Stefan kind of going back and forth with him, and I think it's Raul Jamai, who very intelligent guy, understands markets very well, but I don't know if he really has spent the time that Stefan Livera has on Mengerian origins of money or Szaboian origins of money, and how new money's come to be. Quite the opposite, in fact. They are entrenched in the status quo of just government makes money, and that's what it is. And I think they're all starting to ask these questions of themselves, and hopefully the really smart guys and the influential people can do the research and really try to understand this stuff. But I as much as people like that understand the markets, I don't think that they understand how new money come to be. And there's another guy who is similar, but not like Raul, is Ben Hunt.
Oh yeah.
Epsilon. And that's a really interesting one, because I think he potentially does understand this stuff, but he's like me in 2013 or 2014 or whatever. There's this could never work. The governments will shut it down, and a lot of my smart friends will say that. And I certainly do believe that a lot of governments will ban it, and I also believe that that's really only going to hurt them, and they're but I do think it will happen. I think more governments will ban it. Some already have, but to it's like trying to ban the printing press. It's like trying to ban the cell phone.
Yep.
I don't think this technology is not going away. You could try to kill the Bitcoin network, and I think that would be very difficult to do and very expensive. But you might actually be relatively successful in doing that. But what about the other 3,000? Or even then, even if you kill the Bitcoin network, could the UTXO set just be ported to a new technology or whatever? And I don't think it can go away at this point. It's like the cat's out of the bag.
It is.
Governments will try to regulate around it, and they'll be successful in some ways, and they'll be unsuccessful in some ways.
I was talking to, I was speaking to somebody recently about actually exactly what you're talking about, and the perspective was very interesting, because a lot of people think that governments don't really understand cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, and actually the governments really understand it very well, and they're keen. They're much more keen on this than we think. Okay. So I think, like, if you take a look, like, look, man, like, look at the internet, right? Look at your point. Like, look at cell phone technologies. Everybody in the government today has a cell phone. Everybody's on the internet. The government uses the internet. Like, you know what I mean? It's like they couldn't ban it. They couldn't stop it. Sure, at first they try, and like you said, they're going to try to regulate around it. And that's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to regulate around it because it's all they can do. So I'm like... And that's not to say that I necessarily agree that the governments understand it very well, but it was interesting to hear that perspective and got me thinking. I'm like, you know what? It's my own bias that makes me think that the government doesn't understand it. It's like, almost like that's what I want to believe. I don't know.
I think that the way that we talk about the government is probably not necessarily helpful to understanding. Colin and I have discussed on the Bitcoin Echo Chamber these kind of macro ideas of, like, what are nation states plays, which cards do they have left to play or whatever. But I think the thing that we bring up that is really interesting is that the government is not a single entity and doesn't always act as one. It is, a bunch of individual humans. And if there is this guy that's doing as much research on Bitcoin as some, people like Nick Carter or whatever, maybe he turned into a Bitcoiner and now he's trying to convince everybody. And he's like, oh, nope, you can't kill it. Oh, well, it's like, better buy Bitcoin. Who knows what's happening in there? And certainly there's somebody in the government being like, let's not do this. Like, oh, I think his name is Brad Sherman, and just expose, the value proposition of this currency to the Congress or whatever he was talking to. So it's a bunch of individual actors, and there's all these checks and balances in our government, and it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out, especially in the light of the fact that the U.S. Congress is talking about shit coins now, and everyone is looking at the difference between what Facebook would be, or Facebook's currency or whatever would be, and what Bitcoin is. And I'm just happy that we're finally having this conversation on a worldwide scale. And it's funny because I'm saying finally, and it took me 9 years to really start having the conversation too. So, but regardless, it's good that the conversation is happening nonetheless, right?
Absolutely. So look, so you and I, I tried to go on a path, but we're having such a good conversation that I totally missed. I wanted you to, if you can, give the listeners, like, what's your rabbit hole story? Like, how did you actually get into it in 2017?
So I don't know if you're aware or not, but in 2017 the price went up a lot.
Oh yeah. It did.
So
like crazy.
Yeah. So like I read about Bitcoin on Slashdot, probably 2011, and I was like, oh, cool, anonymous internet money. That's interesting. And actually, I wanted to get some a few times, but I couldn't figure out a way to get it anonymously, so I didn't. And I kind of forgot about it. And you see it on, like, TV shows that, like, criminals use it. And it, kind of was always in the back of my mind, but I remember reading about it really early on and being like, that's kind of a crazy thing. Let's not just, drop all my US dollars and buy it. But I really didn't get that far into it. I just, like, kind of understood the protocol at a very base level. And I didn't really understand the implications of it, for sure. And in 2017, the price went up. And like I fully admit this is the reason I started paying attention. Mostly because it kept coming up everywhere.
Yes.
Not just like I saw the price go up, but like I saw like more people talking about the conversations, going on. And I was like, I'm going to take another look at this thing because I don't understand why that's happening. And I'd like to understand that. I'm always like the type of person that tries to understand as much about the world as possible. And what's really interesting is that in trying to understand Bitcoin, I think I understand the world about 5 times better than I did a year and a half ago. I feel like, so, I was telling you at the very beginning of this that it seemed like the world was just overly unfair to the people that are working the hardest, despite all these amazing improvements in technology that we already talked about help level the playing field and help everybody. It seemed like it was getting almost worse despite all these amazing progresses. And now it all makes perfect sense to me. And my thesis now, in having gone down that rabbit hole, is that inflation is the biggest problem we face today. And I did a thread about this, and I guess it did okay. That inflation is what everybody's talking about in the election right now. They're talking about the cost of medical care, the cost of housing, cost of food may not come up as much, but that is a factor as well. Inflation, the increase in prices and the increase in the monetary supply, depending on who you're asking, I think is the biggest problem that society faces today. That's the real rabbit hole, and I think this is relatively straightforward to explain to people, and that's my new goal, is to try to show people how inflation is destroying our society.
Yes. And actually, okay, you know what? On that point, so for me, that's the same type of angle that I use when I talk to people about Bitcoin or they start asking me questions about it. I go with the aspect, because you have to make it personal, right? It has to affect a person at that core level where they understand. And
why do I care about Bitcoin? That's just a bunch of nerds on the internet with their like weird drugs and stuff.
Exactly.
Why should I care? Yeah, why would I, that only matters if everybody buys it, right? Yes.
Well, that only matters if everybody buys it. I mean, again, so now we're going to go into that kind of idea, right, of like, is it that we all have this shared illusion? And I know, like, I've had this discussion with Stefan Livera, and I know he doesn't, like, the idea that money is the shared illusion. And I forget who it was that had a debate about that, but
I think Neil Woodfine, who's now rebranded to Neil Meatfine, had a really interesting thread about that. So go look that up. I don't think it's really as. I mean, yeah, it's an interesting kind of thought thing that money's a shared illusion, but I don't agree now, and I think Neil did change my mind a little bit, and I'm not going to be able to reiterate his arguments here, so I recommend going to look up that thread. But Stefan makes it very simple when he says it's simple. Money is the most saleable good. It is the most liquid good.
Yep.
And it tends to converge on one, or maybe two. And it's possible that Andreas talks about a lot of people criticize Andreas for supporting Ethereum, for not being a Bitcoin maximalist. I suppose that there is a possibility of this quote long tail Pareto distribution, but I still think that Bitcoin will probably absorb. I personally think that Bitcoin is going to take the vast majority of the monetary liquidity in the world in the future.
I do agree.
I don't think there's really room for much shitcoins because liquidity is king. I think I always say this on every podcast, but I think it's so important. As Saifedean, he said, it was just in some random Twitter thread too. It wasn't like one of his big things, but liquidity is king, and his demonstration of that, his example, is that second layer gold beat first layer silver because liquidity is king. And he talks about stock to flow. What I've been getting into recently is this idea that Austrian economists advocated for gold, and they didn't advocate. Eric Voskuil, who's a really interesting thinker, kind of rails on Saifedean for talking about the stock to flow hardness of a money. Okay. And actually Eric has some interesting points there, because Eric is very ardent about being using only logic and deduction not using like empiricism or data to prescribe, how we should move forward, economically speaking. And this is a very Austrian concept. So, it's very weird to see, these two people that you both respect that are vehemently disagreeing on this main topic. So, I went with Austrians are proponents of gold. Why is that? Why are they allowed to be proponents of gold? And what's their argument? Well, the argument is that gold already won. It already emerged on the free market. So they support it as the people's choice of money. They're not saying gold stock to flow was better than the rest of them. That's just that it already emerged as the best money. And maybe that stock to flow thing, essentially to try to sum up what I'm trying to say here, is that I think Bitcoin is already emerging as gold did in a free market, as the money of the world. Its dominance is almost indisputable in any metric you look at. That's why I advocate for Bitcoin. And I think Saifedean's argument to understand the empiricism behind it, while maybe not rooted exactly in Austrian theory and methodology, I still think it does help support why. But I don't know. That's my kind of rant on, the emergence of money. And I think that, this is a conversation that I'd like to see happen more, and not have, these people just blocking each other or whatever. I do think it's extremely interesting, and I like hearing different perspectives on it because, we as Bitcoiners do not always agree, and that is totally great. One of my favorite things to do is disagree with people that I think are extremely intelligent. That's why I like talking to Eric, because I don't always agree with him, but he's a very intelligent guy, and he has been thinking about this far longer than I have. So.
Well, it's to your point, it's very important to, number one, to be willing to challenge your own ideas, because what a lot of people don't realize about human behavior is that, we marry ideas. It's like all of a sudden we take ownership of these ideas and then we take them personally, and then it becomes this personal attack, and now all of a sudden I'm defending this not because of its properties or its qualities, but I'm defending this because it's my idea. You know what I mean? Like
it's dogma. It's dogma.
Exactly. And
have you
like,
seen the movie Dogma?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
There's one quote in that movie. I mean, the movie is just a comedy. Some interesting religious perspective and philosophy if you like to get into that stuff. But my favorite quote from that movie is one of my favorite quotes from any movie. And he says, and I'll paraphrase here, and this is Chris Rock talking.
Nice.
And he says something along the lines of, I gotta remember this quote. This is so good. Don't worry, this is worth it. You can change an idea. Ideas are powerful, but beliefs are far trickier to change. And I think it goes on a little bit, but this idea that, if we hold ideas in our head, they're malleable. I think Pierre is always saying, and I don't think it's a Pierre quote, but he always says, strong ideas weakly held, or something like that. But when you have belief, it's very difficult to change them, and I think that's what you were talking about. I'm just reiterating exactly what you said. If you believe in fiat money, it's going to be very difficult to entertain the idea of Bitcoin. And if you believe in Bitcoin, it can be very hard to entertain the idea of something else, I suppose. But let's have ideas and let's hash them out, right?
Exactly. Like it's to that point, it's important to have those ideas and to be able to think critically about them, and be able to just simply, I think what I'm trying to say is don't put any emotion into them. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like there's a term called bare attention, and essentially it's part of mindfulness, okay? And that's exactly what it is, to examine ideas as they are. They're not happy or sad, they're not good or bad. They're simply as they are, information that we look at and that we have to decide based on their merits. And that's something that, like, I find, like, oftentimes, when we see these arguments or these discussions on Bitcoin, This kind of goes back to that, destroying fake news. The ideas that are argued objectively on their merits, they stand the test of time. The quotes that people put out that are built on properties and, again, that objective reality, those are the quotes that stand the test of time. It's really, really interesting, and I find that Bitcoin really brings that out. Because if your argument is soft and you're too heavily emotionally involved in it, you're going to, it's not about winning or losing, but yes, you're going to lose. You're going to lose, because what's happening is that you're arguing with your emotion. You're not arguing with the merit of the information that you have. So,
and another interesting thing about this space, I agree with that. Another interesting thing about this space is that, we are arguing about, the emergence of monies, something that hasn't happened for hundreds and hundreds of years. Like gold and silver were like the last two in recent memory. So we're arguing and trying to, say that we're authorities on the information of a completely new paradigm, because it's not just the emergence of monies now. This is the emergence of digital commodities, which is a brand new concept in the digital age. And by the way, I love this. Who is it? Is that Michael Goldstein that talks about the monetization of a good in real time? The monetization of gold took years of years. This is all now happening. Can you hear me? This is all. Oh, okay. Well, it's all happening like right now at the speed of light, and this gets to your idea about Bitcoin time that you mentioned when we were having a chat right before the pod. Is that oh man, time just seems to pass very strangely for me now.
Yes.
It's because I think for me it's like there was a life I had that I didn't really understand. I feel like I understand the world better. I mentioned that earlier, and it's like pre-2017 life, and then 2017 onward that I now denominate time differently from that. It's like a new epoch for me. And I think the human race will do the same thing. It'll be 2009 and before, and 2009 and after. I think that this is a brand new paradigm that has just changed the rules. People talk about game theory a lot, but Eric Voskuil has gotten me to modify that to really following the incentives. It's much simpler to say and much simpler to understand that the incentives are really different now. If Bitcoin can disintermediate the need for government money and show the world that we can just as Andreas says, exit the system. And provide a stable, liquid store of value and medium of exchange and unit of account for the world that maybe the governments won't resist. As they'll try to resist, and they'll realize that they can't anyway.
Well, the reality is that if the governments can get their cut, right? That's all they really care about. I mean, in the end, the governments, I think, clearly they're bad at monetary policy. Okay, so obviously they can't be trusted, right? Because they're just going to do what is easiest, which is just simply print us into a total shithole. So
but
they
that's
can't.
The incentive. That's the incentives. It's
exactly. It's a problem of
evil.
Incentives. Yes. No, exactly. I totally agree with that. It is an issue of incentives, but the machine that is the government, right? Because of the incentive structure, cannot do the right thing. So if we take this monetary production away from them, right? Then they can't harm us in that way. Or at least I'd like to believe they can't harm us in that way.
To paraphrase Milton Friedman, you've got to, if you want to change things, you've got to make it profitable for the wrong people to do the right thing.
Yes. And again, that's the incentives.
So I would push back on one thing you said, which is as long as the government gets their cut, then they'll be okay with it. I disagree. I think that Bitcoin is going to expose the cut that they're taking right now. And that's what I mean about inflation, is that this is this hidden, clandestine way of extracting wealth from people, and giving it to not just governments, but like, the people on top, the 1% and the 0.1%. I don't know why I feel like I'm the only Bitcoiner that talks about this inequality thing. I think people might misunderstand a little bit. I don't believe that everyone should have the same amount of money. That is not what I'm trying to say here. What I'm trying to say is I think this current system, it stratifies wealth, and it gives wealth to people that are simply already on top, and it keeps them on top.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of threads. If you read through all the threads that are into my profile, I'm right now. Can you hear me?
Now I can. Yeah.
I don't want to lay out all these arguments right now on this podcast, but if you want to see my arguments for why, you can head to my profile. I have it. All my threads are pinned right there. But I believe that this system is actively keeping people with lots of money on top, and it's keeping the poorest people down. So again, I'm not a socialist. I'm not trying to say we should just redistribute all the money, right? I think a wealth transfer is already happening. That's part of Bitcoin's monetization process. But that I do believe that this is a current problem that I don't hear Bitcoiners talk about, because I think that they're afraid to suggest that we should redistribute wealth. And again, that is not what I'm trying to say, but that the system is broken itself. That it rewards people for simply being on top.
That's right. It's not actually rewarding them based on, I guess you'd say like a generally accepted metric or something like that. Like it's
again, the problem is inflation, right?
Yeah.
And the simple answer is that with inflation, you don't have a liquid store of value money, because the store of value feature is gone, right?
That's right.
We intentionally removed that store of value feature from money in order to get people to spend, because, quote, that makes the economy better, right? But it turns out that people just end up storing their money elsewhere, and the people that are the wealthiest have the best access to those things.
Yes.
So my point is that I think Bitcoin gives everybody a liquid store of value money, and that's a great thing.
And everybody, and I think that to a certain extent, everybody deserves it. I mean, let's be honest, right? Why should somebody extremely wealthy be able to store their time value better than somebody who's not? Like, in the end, we're all humans. So why should
It's funny because I hear everyone talk about I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No.
I hear everyone talk about the Cantillon effect, and I think that's important to understand, that people that are close to the new source of money, that they stand to benefit more because they can spend their money before the prices rise, and that is a thing that is tied to inflation. However, I think that this lack of store of value for the poor is the most important thing. And what's amazing is when I argue with Keynesians about this, their argument is that the poor don't have any savings. And I say, that's my fucking point. Excuse my English. That's my point. They don't have any savings for a very good reason. They don't even have a way to save their money, because it is evaporating. It's like Venezuela in slow motion.
That's right. That is, I totally agree. It's the most ridiculous thing in the world. But you know what? And now you were talking about education before, but let's be honest. They don't, one of the things, I'm sure you remember this from economics. Like I remember this in economics.
I never took economics in high school.
Oh, so there you go. I mean, like, and in my case,
I went to a hippie school where we didn't have to take classes. So
nice.
Yeah.
Everybody paint.
So it's funny because I'm fresh. I never learned the economics than most people. I've only learned Austrian economics.
That's actually awesome, because I could tell you in the general school system, and I'm originally from Montreal, so I'm giving you the perspective from like a Canadian, but in economics, man, they don't explain to you properly, the true implications of money, and what money is. All they do is explain to you how people use money today okay? And they show you like a basic ledger book. They show you how money goes in and money goes out, but they don't explain to you the most important part of money, which is what you touched on, is that the base asset that money is supposed to be pinned to is completely gone, and as a result, all you have is inflation.
Well,
So
they did that intentionally, and they told us that
that's
that was
right.
for the greater good. But
And they
again, I think that
and they
it's
don't
just
let you
because it's a
argue it.
for sure,
You
but
know,
that's because it's a foregone conclusion, right?
it,
That if I in 2008 went to the governments and said, "Hey guys, I have this better form of money. I think we should stop using fiat because of the inflation. Let's use this." I'm assuming they'd all laugh at me, and probably anybody I went to on the street too and said, "Hey guys, let's use this brand new money. I think it's better." They'd probably all laugh at me too, because it's accepted that just governments control money. There's another great quote about that. That's like, most economists, usually proponents of the free market, stop short at money and just insist that the government must regulate it,
that's
must
right.
supply it. We just accept this as a foregone conclusion.
Exactly.
It's the tyranny of the status quo.
Dogma.
Dogma, yes, exactly.
It's like, and it's true. It's like, like I remember. So we're talking about that it's a foregone conclusion, right? That governments produce money. Like I remember being like, what was it? Like maybe 17 or 18, and I started to I read this little book, right, called The Little Book of Money, or The Little Money Book. Okay. And obviously they talk about the shells and talk about all different like different aspects of like how money gets created and whatnot. And like I get to this book and I'm like I get to the end of this tiny little book that tries to explain money as simply as it can to you, and the only conclusion I came to at the end was, oh my God, we've been hoodwinked. Like it's
I want to read this now.
Sorry.
I want to read the book now.
Yeah, I'll you know what, I'll send you the link to it. It's actually pretty. It's good, and it does explain it simply.
I thought you were going to say it gets to the end and then we're like, and then we adopted government money and everything was great.
Oh yeah, no, it totally goes into like how the debasement of money from gold and Oh yeah, but it does it simply. I'll send you the link after. I'll post it even in the show notes for listeners who who want to check it out. And actually, speaking of the show notes, I'm going to I'll post a link to your profile so people can go and check out your tweet threads and everything.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, no, for sure. But going back to the going back to what we were just discussing with with education and whatnot. So it's like they don't, especially what they don't teach is they don't teach people really about the importance of putting your money in these other investment vehicles. You know what I mean? Like essentially, it's like when there's only fiat, right? You have no choice but to diversify. And the only people who can afford to diversify are people who have chosen either to educate themselves in that manner, that they understand that they have to diversify, or they had somebody in their lives who was already financially literate that was able to teach them that. But the point I'm trying to make is that they had no choice but to diversify. So if you want to store your value, you now all of a sudden either hand your money to a financial, a financial advisor or something like that. So again, trusting your money to some centralized third party that's just going to make decisions for you, or you now have to take on the second job of becoming an investment guru, and start trading stocks.
I know what you're saying. I don't think it's so occulted, this idea that, preserving your wealth long term is not a good idea in fiat dollars. I think, a lot of people have IRAs, and investment accounts, and obviously those aren't just stored in cash. So it's not like this is a hidden truth for anybody that's really asking the question. But
true.
But your point that's way more important is that some people have better access to this stuff, and my argument is that people, the poorest among us, have no access to this. They live paycheck to paycheck, and anything that they can squirrel away, they need it to be liquid so that they could spend it if they needed it, if something came up. And I think the wealthier you are, the more of your wealth you can afford to store in these assets that appreciate in value. Um, that's the problem with inflation. That's why it stratifies, the wealth.
It goes back to something also that you said before, and we've heard this, I think, in other podcasts, but the people closest to the money production get the most value out of that, out of that money.
The Cantillon effect, or Cantillon effect.
I know, I can't pronounce it right. It's like Keynesian. I've heard other people pronounce it Keynesian, and I'm like, I have no idea. I've got no clue.
The flip side of this is deflation, right?
Yes.
Which I don't talk about as often, but probably just as important. And I think I always end up talking about the same things, but I'd still like to see this conversation happen more. So I'm going to continue to do that.
So,
deflation is how we measure progress in society. When you look at the last 100 years and you point to how our living standards have increased, which has been I've heard that this is the argument for government money. Look how well we are doing. We use government money. And they'll point to how our living standards have increased, right? And how have our living standards have increased? By access to more affordable things. Our electronics are better. We have better technology in our houses and around us. And that's from deflation.
I like that point, and I do agree with that. I definitely agree with that. And actually, I was thinking about this. A lot of people say, to your point, okay, look at how far along we've come, but I don't know if people really attribute that to deflation.
They don't. That's my point.
They think that it has to do with the fact that we have access to all of this money, and look at the system, the current money system that we have. Look at how it created all of this wealth and all of this boom. But my question,
and I argued that it happened despite that.
Exactly. It happened despite that. And my question is, how much better would it be if we would have used a deflationary currency, or something, obviously something with scarcity and a hard cap and a monetary policy that can't be manipulated by the governments? We always sit there and look at how far we are, but I think we'd be, and of course I won't know, because that's not the path we took, but how much further ahead would we be? Nobody can really quantify that, because that's not the path we took. So now with Bitcoin, we have a chance to explore that path.
I suppose.
So
who knows what the future will bring?
It's nice to get cosmic a little and try to imagine.
What if we're wrong and Bitcoin goes to zero? See, we had to say it, right?
Well, you know what? Yeah, let's go down there. If we're wrong and Bitcoin goes to zero, this goes back to something you said earlier. The rabbit's out of the hat. It doesn't at this point. And I know so many people will hate me for saying this, but at this point, if Bitcoin goes to zero, it doesn't matter anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Because now they can't stop what it's brought.
Well, it'll never go to zero.
No, I know it. I know it won't. But
I heard Saifedean say something like, "If it goes down to $1, I'll buy it all."
I was going to say,
one of those guys has said that, and it's like there's a lot of people that will never sell their Bitcoin, whether even it goes down to $50 or whatever, it'll never go to zero.
Okay, so let me ask you this, right? Because I'm sure I mean, look, you went through the bear market that I hate to call it a bear market, because seriously, we're still significantly up from zero back in 2009, so I don't really consider these bear markets. I just consider these typical cycles, and I'm not such a price guy, okay? But the reality is, every time Bitcoin has dropped, the only thought that I have is, damn it, I wish I had more money on the side to buy more. So, and I know for a fact I'm not the only one that thinks like this. So, to your point, Bitcoin doesn't go to zero.
Yeah, well, it's because that you're assessing your wealth in terms of Bitcoin. You're already using Bitcoin as a unit of account.
Yeah.
As absurd an idea that is, it's because of the vast understanding and research we've done on this monetary paradigm shift that we think is going to happen. That you now value your wealth in terms of Bitcoin. So that takes a lot of mental effort to wrap your head around. Because I remember seeing that like very early on, people were like, "Oh, well, 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin." Like, you can't do the same thing with the U.S. dollar. 1 U.S. dollar equals 1 U.S. dollar, because
It's not true.
I mean, although the U.S. hasn't printed money for 5 years, I think they printed like 4 trillion in the 5 years previous. So, Bitcoin obviously is a different paradigm. So there's a reason people say that, but it took me a long time to understand what they were talking about. The 1 = 1. So I think it'll take other people a while to figure that out.
You know what? You bring up a good point, right? And this is something actually I discussed with Dan Held, and he brought this up. I really like this idea, is the narrative compression, right? Like the best, like essentially, like right now, what we don't have yet in Bitcoin, but it is emerging, is that perfect narrative. That the narrative that brings the average person into the fold with a proper understanding of what it's going to mean for them.
Yeah, and that's
Dan
what we
don't have
really
yet.
good at that. He's very good at that, and Francis Pouleau is very good at that, and Messire, Gigi, Gigi's incredible.
Yes,
these guys are trying to distill it down, and I think Saifedean has done a great job as well.
Nope.
The economist. I said Saifedean has done a great job of this as well. I think he may not be the Austrian economist, but he is helping people understand why Bitcoin might emerge as a global money.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Dan. I mean, Dan. I find. I find that he explains things very simply. And that to me, it's not just to me, but there's that quote that the mark of a genius is to reduce the extremely complex to simple. So and that's to me that's exactly what he does with Bitcoin.
That dude is on another level. I got to meet him at the MIT Bitcoin Expo.
I can't believe we didn't meet each other there.
I mean, first of all, I know, right? We were like crossing paths almost. He's such a great guy. First of all, I just sat down and talked to him for like an hour. But man, he's just on another level. I need to go back and like reread all his stuff, because it's pretty bullish.
It is. It's super bullish, and I recommend it to anybody that's really wanting to get into Bitcoin and has decided. Once you've decided to take the official tumble, and I'm I want to get into this, it's check out his work. I always refer them to him. Obviously Andreas.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of his one of my favorite talks is, which is kind of weird, I can't find it on YouTube anymore, is 50 50 currencies that'll be worth dog shit or something like that, or 50 currencies that are worth dog shit. Anyways,
I've watched 100 of his videos. I don't know that one though.
I'm gonna see. I kid you not, man. It's gone off of YouTube. That was one that I saw probably back in I'd say late 2017, maybe early 2018.
Another really good resource to point people to, I think, is Gigi's 21 Lessons.
Yes.
If you haven't read through that whole thing, oh man, he just lays out all these little tidbits, and just really wraps up, the value proposition of Bitcoin, and he kind of tries to attack it from a few different angles, and I think it's incredible work.
I did a podcast with him. I don't know if you checked it out, but man, he's super cool. He's
awesome.
He's super, super cool, and he's extremely intelligent. So it's I love that. For me, it's So
I just gonna.
Oh, it just totally cut out.
Oh, sorry. I don't know what's going on with my Wi-Fi here.
Oh, that's okay.
I reached out to Gigi recently, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm working on this article. Do you want to take a look at it?" And I mean, maybe he had already had somebody else take a look at it, but I found one very minor thing that I would have changed, and the rest of it was just such genius. And he's like, "Oh, thanks for the help," and I was like, "Dude, it was the gravity article." I was like, Man, I got to read this before everybody else.
Is that not such an
It
honor?
wasn't like I helped him at all. Oh my god.
That is absolutely awesome. Okay, so hey,
Yeah.
Ben, for the listeners out there, because I can just keep talking to you forever, and I think we're going to end up having another one of these talks. But let me ask you this: do you run a Lightning node?
Yes.
Awesome. What do you, if you don't mind me asking, what type do you run?
I don't have a wall of nodes like you do, but I just have I have Pierre Richard's node launcher.
Nice.
I think it's just that simple. I've never been like a geek's geek. I've always just been kind of like this in between, guy where I've always had a real close eye on computers, but I've always been interested in lots of other things too. So Pierre Richard is just like, if you haven't seen his node launcher, it's like Windows, Mac, and Linux. Download it, install it, follow like 5 steps, and it's up and running. And I have a full Bitcoin node, full Lightning node, and it works great. I only had a few minor issues, and I just jumped into Telegram, and he's right there to help you out.
He is so
and it's going to be over Tor in the next release, I believe, which is awesome. But I would like to get a nodal. I think that having a dedicated piece of hardware, I'm still kind of trying to let it flesh out into it's like that whole thing about buying and tech. I'd really like to see it solidify a little bit more, but they already have such a great product. That's probably what I would get if I was going to get a hardware box. But I'm sure that that you would probably be shilling those little Raspberry Blitz things. And I know you have a bunch of those, and I'm sure that that's a cheaper option too. So
yeah.
I haven't done all my research yet. So
well, you know what? I'll point you to. I wrote an article about. It's called "Adventures in Lightning Land," and it's exactly about my whole trip down all these different Lightning nodes and trying them out, and doing the research. So it might actually be helpful. And I also outlined the different price points, and so I'll send you the link to it if you're interested. It's a short read, 9 minutes, and yeah. But to go back to it, I have the Raspberry Blitzes, and I have a Casa node. And I don't have a Nodal yet, but I do intend on getting one. The big difference, though, with the Nodal is that it's more powerful, okay, than a Casa. It's more powerful than Raspberry Blitz, but it has to be because, or I shouldn't say it has to be, but it has the other piece that it has that those nodes don't have yet is BTC Pay Server.
Right.
So that you can, shout out to Nicholas Dorier for making BitPay obsolete. I love that tweet.
Yes.
I love that tweet.
So good.
Oh, it's so good. But yes, so
lies.
Sorry.
Oh, lies. He said.
Yeah, lies. I loved it. So yeah, that's awesome. So look, we're gonna wrap it up, man. But it's been really, really great. It's been really great talking to you. And if people want to find you, what's the best way to reach out to you?
I mostly just rant on Twitter, so just reach out to me at MrCoolbp, Ben Prentice, and listen to me just rant endlessly about inflation. So
I'm gonna put contact details in the show notes as well for your Twitter. So thank you very much. And so Ben, I really appreciate your time, and I really, really enjoyed this conversation, man. Thank you so much for being on my podcast.
Thanks, man. Thanks for letting me rant at you for an hour.
I wouldn't say it was we went back and forth. It was pretty good.
Yeah. I liked it. It was a great time, man. Thank you so much for having me on.
Cool.
All right.
Bye.
Later.
I hope everybody enjoyed my discussion with MrCoolbp, Ben Prentice. Look for his Twitter contact details in the show notes. I'm also going to post a link to his Twitter feed so that people can go check out some of his inflation rants. And of course, as always, if you want to reach out to me on Twitter or Telegram, I'm at CoinIcarus. If you want to reach out to me by email, I'm funwithcrypto@protonmail.com. Be reckless, have fun, catch you all next time.